Well, good morning again, church. Today we're continuing with our series on the book of Ruth, Light in the Darkness. As I mentioned last week, this short story may not be packed with deep theological ideas, but it offers some amazing teaching and is a beautiful example of how God interacts with us in our everyday lives, providing for our every need. Despite being set in a dark period, the period of the judges of Israel, when it says in Judges 21-25 that there was no king and that everyone did what was right in their own eyes, the main three characters, Naomi, Ruth and Boaz, who we're yet to meet, display loyalty, love and a deep sense of righteousness. Seemingly uncommon characteristics during those days. If you missed last week's introduction, I encourage you to catch up online on our YouTube channel. It's up there already, because it'll give you a bit of a context and a bit of background as to this series. And a lot happens in the first 5 verses, which I'm about to cover right now. You know, last week I set the scene and introduced Elimelech and Naomi with their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, who moved to the neighbouring country of Moab. And although we initially led to believe that their choice to move there was to avoid famine, it was more likely that they were trying to avoid God's judgment on the land because of the people's immoral behaviour and idolatry. I also suggested, though this is just me, that they may have given up on God altogether for their provision and chose to go it alone. As I said, within 10 years of living in Moab, all the men, Elimelech, Mahlon and Chilion, die. How, we don't know, but Naomi is left destitute with her 2 sons' Moabite wives, Orpah and Ruth. And as I said, this is just the first 5 verses of the book of Ruth. Today I want to look at the remainder of chapter 1 and compare the choices of these 2 daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth, and how their choices defined their future. Choices that define our future. Now, researchers at the Cornell University estimate that we make about 35,000 randomly conscious decisions a day. 35,000 decisions. No wonder we're all exhausted. We're just thinking too hard. 226 of those are about food. I think for me it's probably more like 500 of those are about food, but anyway, I can have to decide what I'm going to eat. And as the level of our responsibility increases, so does the multitude of choices. Now that doesn't necessarily only apply to people who work or work-related, climbing that ladder or something like that. Imagine what your mums and dads in the room, just think, what was your life like before you had kids? As soon as you have kids, the number of choices that you get to make or you have to make every day significantly increases. That's why parents get grey hair. I've only got 2 children. Imagine what my hair would be like if I had more. Wouldn't have any, that's right. With each decision, of course, we make come certain consequences that are both good and bad. During World War II, the Prime Minister of the UK, Winston Churchill, was forced to make a painful choice. He had to make a lot of painful choices, but one particular. The British Secret Service had broken the Nazi war codes and informed Churchill that the Germans were about to bomb Coventry. He had 2 alternatives. 1, evacuate the citizens and save hundreds of lives, but at the expense of indicating to the Germans that the code was broken. Or 2, take action take no action, which would kill hundreds, but would keep the information flowing and possibly save even more lives. What a decision, hey? He chose option 2, and they chose not to do anything. And every day the code breakers would sit in the room deciphering Nazi codes and make calculated decisions as to how to respond, what to respond to and what not to respond to. In effect, they're deciding who got to live and who didn't get to live. Imagine having that job. As horrible as it may sound, it allowed the Allies to fool the Germans into thinking that their codes were unbreakable. And in effect, shortened the length of the war significantly, saving hundreds and thousands of people. You know, many of our decisions in life may have little to varying consequences. Some have very little consequences. The result of some of our choices have ongoing lifelong consequences that change and impact the course of our lives forever, even affecting others too. So today I want to pick up on the story 10 years after the family had moved to Moab. Somehow Naomi heard that the famine, which was obviously a localised one, was over and that the Lord had come to the aid of his people. And upon hearing this, she and her 2 daughter-in-laws set out for Bethlehem, Judah, Naomi's hometown. But at some point of time, on the way there, on a dusty, dirty road, she stops. She blesses them and she encourages them to turn around and go back to their homeland. We pick up the story from Ruth 1:8. It says, "Then Naomi said to her 2 daughter-in-laws, 'Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me.'" I just want to stop there for a bit. I want to do something. I'm doing a few things a little bit different this morning. I want to teach you a bit of Hebrew. Don't worry, I'm not very good at Hebrew. I bombed out after day 2 of my intensive Hebrew class when I was at theological college. Day 2, I didn't know day 2 and I went, I'm done. And there's another story with all that. It was actually quite amazing how God works through that. But anyway, I want to teach you one particular word. It's a really important word. The word is, in effect, the equivalent to the Greek word in the New Testament for love, agape. And similar to agape, which has a depth of meaning, so does the Hebrew alternative for love. As translated in, it should be up on the screen, as translated in English as kindness. So you ready for the word? The word is hesed. Is it up there? Hesed. Okay, so I'm going to say after me, hesed. You've got to really hark up that H. It's Hebrew, right? Hesed. Come on, you can do better. Hesed. Declan's frowning at me going, surely it doesn't sound like that. Yeah, that's it. You can hark it up, that's it. Hesed. It's a hard word to translate in English, but it doesn't necessarily just mean love. And unlike the Greek alternative, it's more than just undeserved love either. It means kindness, compassion, loyalty, mercy, and care. And it's not just a feeling, but an action. It's about being faithful. It's about being forgiving. It's about being steadfast, reliable. It's this long haul, no matter what kind of love. And like agape, it isn't dependent on a response. Hesed, God hesed us because He is Hesed. He is love. He is Hesed. The word, like nothing else, summarizes the character of our loving Father, Yahweh. And here Naomi prays for Yahweh to show Hesed to Orpah and Ruth, just as they had shown it to her sons and to her. Naomi's blessing continues, and so in verse 9 she says, "And may the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Naomi prays for her daughter-in-laws to receive God's rest. That is peace, security, and provision. You know, in ancient Israel, women without the supervision of an adult male to care for them and protect them were left exposed to poverty and exploitation. Therefore, Naomi's prayer for them and request that they return to their native land was out of a great love for them. For she sincerely believed that their only hope for rest was to be found in their home country, where they had a far better chance of finding a new husband. This, however, would leave Naomi on her own, make it harder for her to survive. But she was willing to forego her own safety and happiness for the benefit of her daughter-in-laws. This is how great her love for them was. So she kissed them goodbye and bid them farewell. And we pick up the story again, and it says, "But, weeping aloud, they said to Naomi, 'We will go back to your people.' But Naomi said, 'Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to a son,'" we'd have to be two sons, wouldn't it? "Would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is far better for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." This passage might sound a little bit weird, but the custom in Israel made sure to provide for women without children who lose their husbands. When a man died without a male child to carry on the family legacy, it was his brother's responsibility to take up the call. The responsibility was he was encouraged to take the widow in order to raise up a child for the dead man. And as such, Naomi is reminding Orpah and Ruth that there was no living brothers of the dead husbands who could take on this role. Clearly, she's forgotten about Boaz, who we'll learn about a little bit later, a relative who could possibly perform this duty of a brother. And we'll get to him next week. But even if Naomi managed to remarry, there's no certainty at her age that she would even be able to conceive. And not to mention that the girls would have to wait until these future sons were of marriageable age. So Naomi is basically saying, "Daughters, I deeply love you. I deeply care for you, but I just cannot provide what you need." At this, Orpah and Ruth wept aloud. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. It's at this point that the two girls make opposite choices, decisions that lead them down different life paths, choices that define their future. We've got 2 points this morning, and I just want to unpack these two choices. Firstly, Orpah and Ruth evaluate their options with regards to their future prospects. When tough decisions come our way, this is something I suspect we all do. Evaluate our options and discern what is the best course of action. In my family, we've been known to do pros and cons, fors and against lists, where we decide, we list all the pros on one side and the negatives on the other side, and we try to weigh it up. But we don't necessarily go with whatever's the most, because we also have to bring in God in that decision as well and discern what He is actually calling us to. And sometimes we may choose something that doesn't even seem logical, but we go through this process. I'm sure most of you do it to some degree. Some decisions we just make quite quickly and in the spur of the moment, but big decisions like, are you going to move home? Where are you going to move? Do I get a new job? What type of job am I going to get? What are the job options out there? Do I buy a new car, a caravan, or whatever it might be? Some of these big ticket items, we need to spend time and discern and weigh up our prospects, evaluate our future. And this is what we see go on here, I think, to some degree. They would have had to have. Speaking out of love and concern, Naomi made it really clear that she did not see any future for Orpah and Ruth in Judah, especially as she believed that the Lord's hand had turned against her. Something I spoke about last week. Therefore, by attaching themselves to her, would only bring misfortune upon themselves. You've heard of the expression, something like, you attach your cart to me, then, you're going to end up where I am. If they attach their cart to Naomi, the likelihood, in her mind, is misfortune will come upon them too, as it already had. But there are also some key factors to weigh up. So here we've got our pros and cons. All right? I'm going to work with the cons first, the negatives. Some of the cons against, going with Naomi. Following Naomi would mean going to an unknown land, where there are new people, new customs, and a new language. Also, their Moabite background may have actually caused some problems. May have caused the girls to be despised in Judah. And as far as we are aware, it would almost certainly mean remaining unmarried and childless. If by chance they were able to marry again, marrying a non-relative would mean their commitment to Naomi's family would be mute. She'd have to cut ties. They would have to cut ties. And then that would defeat the whole purpose of travelling with her in the first place back to Judah. The idea of travelling back to Judah was to actually to express their love and continue to remain as a family unit, but that would have to be broken if they remarried. This seems like a really grim picture, doesn't it, of their possible future life. From this perspective, going to Judah meant condemning themselves to a life of solitude and misery with no means of support. Okay, let's look at some of the positives. One of the things that, not going back, not following, alternatively, if they were to go back to Moab, they would have the support of family and friends, and therefore access to life's essentials such as food and water. They'd be accepted and welcomed back. They'd be easy to integrate back into their family. They'd have a greater chance of getting married and having children. It seems like a bit of a no-brainer, doesn't it? This is a much brighter picture. So as they stood in the middle of this road, Orpah and Ruth were faced or forced to evaluate their future. Talk about tough timing, Naomi's like, go back. It's like, hang on, I'm working it out in my head. I don't have a piece of paper on me by any chance. Can I do that pros and cons list? They had this choice. Return to Moab, where there was a greater likelihood of happiness, or follow Naomi to Judah, where she says bitterness awaited them. Think about it. What would your response be? Would you seriously follow Naomi to Judah, considering what lay ahead? Orpah, although devastated to leave Naomi, with her future well-being in mind, decided that obviously the benefit of returning to Moab outweighed her commitment to Naomi. Sounds harsh, but that's a reality. It was also the most logical choice. From a worldly perspective, that is. Ruth, on the other hand, does the complete opposite. I love Ruth. She always does the complete opposite. She's one gutsy lady. Ruth 1:15-18 says, "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and where I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realised that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Sometimes in life, we need a good speech, don't we? A good, powerful speech. Nothing beats that, I tell you what a powerful, powerful words from Ruth. It also shows how stubborn she is too. I love it. But this clearly, a lot of people talk about this verse and they talk about, You know, the undivided, the love that Ruth expressed, and you know how emotional it was. I don't want to be interested in that today. Sorry. I want to get into the juicier bits. All right. You know, Ruth clearly understands the implications of her choice and is willing to forsake everything for Naomi. She's also willing to live with the consequences of her decisions, which included a commitment to Naomi to never go back home. This is a lifelong commitment. For she says, "Where you die, I will die, and I will be buried." She's never going home. Ruth's speech stands as a perfect expression of hesed, doesn't it? You know, hesed love. Kindness, compassion, loyalty, mercy, care, and lifelong forgiveness. But more than this, it shows determination. It shows guts. You see, Ruth was a risk taker who took chances that few people were willing to take. But as we often see in Scripture, God rewards radical, faith-filled decisions. Now, sometimes the things that God asks us to do don't make any logical sense, do they? You know, it doesn't make any logical sense. Even look in the Bible, there's a whole lot of stuff that people were asked to do that made no logical sense, according to a worldly perspective. And He often calls us to step out in faith, not knowing where we might be headed. I'm going to give you a bit of random trivia. I'm teaching a bit of Hebrew today. I'm going to give you a bit of trivia on animals. Did you know that the African impala can jump to the height of over 10 feet? Here we go. And cover a distance greater than 30 feet. Jump 10 feet, 30 feet. Yet these amazing animals can be kept in an enclosure in a zoo with a 3-foot wall. A 3-foot wall. Hang on. 10 feet, 3 foot. Why? Anyone know why? They can't see outside? Yeah. The impala will not jump where they cannot see where their feet will land. Faith means jumping and not knowing where your feet will land. Faith is the ability to trust what you do, even though we don't understand or cannot see the consequences of our actions. I wrote that. I should quote that. Put it up somewhere. It's good. Faith is the ability to trust what we do, even though we do not understand or cannot see the consequences of our actions. As I said last week, we just need to step out and place our dependence on and in Him. And this includes making radical faith decisions, not based on worldly understanding, but through prayerful discernment. The famous Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on" what? Yes, not your own understandings. "In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Individually and as a church, are we willing to take risks for God? Are we willing to take risks for God? Or are we more content to follow worldly logic? Are you willing to forsake everything? Jesus said, "Pick up the cross and follow me." Leave it all behind. Are you willing to forsake everything in order to follow God, His vision and His plan for you and your lives? Are you willing to follow the example set by Ruth by taking courage and venturing into the unknown? Or are you going to play it safe? Orpah played it safe, and look where it led her. Back to Moab. By the end of the story of Ruth, we see Naomi's prayer for Ruth fulfilled in the way God shows hesed kindness towards her, and by providing rest in the form of security and provision. All this, because she was faithful with her decision to do what was right and honourable as opposed to what was logical. God rewards radical, faith-filled decisions. Secondly and finally is Orpah and Ruth's choice to either return home to Moab or to go to Judah required a faith commitment for both of them. I'm not sure if you thought of it this way. They had to make a decision. You know, the faith came into play here. It is unknown to what degree Orpah or Ruth followed the Lord when they lived in Moab, but it is assumed that they would have been taught by their husbands, because it was the custom in those days. The husband would teach the wives. And being a good Jewish family, it's highly likely that they knew a fair bit about the God of Israel. So for Orpah, it is interesting that the thought of having to return home to her gods obviously didn't influence her decision, did it? These gods included regional deities as well as the main patron god of Moab, Chemosh. Although little is known about Chemosh worship, we do know that it included violent and sexual acts in which human sacrifices were sometimes performed in order to gain Chemosh's favour. In some cases, entire enemy populations defeated in war were sacrificed to Chemosh as a sign of gratitude for their victory. This is the kind of God that she's going back to. 1 Kings 11:7 says, it actually calls Chemosh the abomination of Moab. Obviously, the thought of going back to that didn't bother her one iota. As such, I actually find it really weird and even sad that Naomi would even suggest she return to these gods. Perhaps she thought it was an acceptable compromise, that the benefit of a prosperous life outweighed the cost of denying Yahweh. Just putting it out there. Yet for Ruth, she seems quite happy to abandon her Moabite gods and instead makes a commitment to follow the God of Israel. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. This in spite of Naomi's bitter experiences. She's had to listen to her mother-in-law yak on and go, the Lord is against me. And yet despite that, she's made a conscious decision on her own. Ruth is not only willing to trust God, but she's also expressed confidence in his provision, even though she's never seen it firsthand. She's lived in Moab. She's probably never even gone outside of her own little village in her whole entire life. And yet she's willing to trust God and go back there and know that, when it says, they discovered that God has heard the cries of the people. He's come back, the famine is gone, and she's willing to go back there and trust him. Even though she's never seen God's hand at work ever before. And in declaring her commitment to Naomi, she even uses the name of God. I am who I am, Yahweh, and calls on him to punish her if she fails to keep her vow. May the Lord, that is Yahweh, whenever you see Lord written in the Bible, that is Yahweh, deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. In doing so, she acknowledges her acceptance of Yahweh as her God. Whether she's already made a commitment to God while living in Moab is unsure, but in her response to Naomi, we hear from her own lips her confession of faith. This becomes the turning point in her life. Those of you who have made faith decisions, you know that at the point of time when you declare the Lord Jesus Christ as the Lord of your life, there is a turning point in your life. You start going in a totally different direction. This was a turning point for her life. Everything changed from that point onwards. There's also at this point that Naomi gave up trying to convince Ruth to leave, as she too acknowledged Ruth's commitment and determination. As Ruth makes it really clear, she is never, ever, ever going back. This is a lifelong commitment in which she has chosen to pursue an entirely different path, one which will lead her to be included into God's people and open up the opportunity for God to bless her. Now for believers, Moab is a picture of the life we left behind. Our life before becoming a Christian. In choosing to follow Christ, we have turned away from this life, turned away from the desires of this world, the desires of the flesh, and we have stepped over into the promised land. However, the problem that so many Christians have is that they're forever turning back and looking at what they've left behind in Moab. It's like that story of Lot. You know the story of Lot in the Bible? You know, they're fleeing the town that God's going to basically wipe to smithereens. He says, but don't look back. Don't look back. And what does she do? She looks back and she's turned to a pillar of salt. Stop looking back. Stop looking back. There is nothing there of consequence. No, some people just want Jesus and all the blessings that come with living with him or for him, and they want the joy of being part of a Christian community, but they also want to enjoy the pleasures of the Moabites. There is no sitting on the fence. Like Orpah and Ruth, we have a choice. Choose life, a life with Christ in the promised land, or choose the world and its evil and corruption, Moab. When tough decisions come our way, and when our livelihood or future well-being is in danger, will you do as Orpah did and turn back to Moab? Or are you like Ruth, committed to a life of faith and following Jesus? So I'm a bit harsh this morning, but I'm quite passionate about this. You know, throughout my life, I've come across people, lots of people, who have called themselves Christians and who have turned away from their faith. And I'm not just talking about those who are being burnt by church and who no longer attend. You know, going to church doesn't make you a Christian. It just helps you grow as a Christian. I mean people who no longer see the value or benefit of following Jesus Christ. When I was a new Christian, I was a young adult at the time, and the church I became a part of had this big young adults ministry. It was vibrant. It was exciting. There was lots of energy. You had this amazing teacher who led. We literally sat at his feet and gleaned from every word he had to say. We used to call him Dr. Dirt because he was studying a doctorate in, what's it when you do? Agricultural science, that's the one. Agricultural science, Dr. Dirt. A great man. Anyway, so it was exciting. You know, and each one of us were passionate, enthusiastic. You know, we would study our Bibles every week. You know, and do Bible studies. We would debate theology and all these great ideas. We would serve in church. We would serve in music and worship teams. We served on missions and beach missions and all these other things, all these great, amazing things. I look back at that group now, and maybe about half of them are still following Christ. The rest seem like they've gone back to Moab. In the year 1519, Hernan Cortez arrived into the New World, modern-day Mexico, with 600 men. However, his soldiers were tired from the journey, and they saw the natives and got a bit scared and decided, we don't want to fight. We want to hop back on that boat. We've done our sight tour. We're going back. We want to go back. So he did something that lived in the memory of generations. He burnt the ships to the waterline. He burnt the ships. And by doing so, he sent this really clear message, didn't he? What was the message? There is no turning back. No turning back. I say this, burn the ships. Burn the ships. Burn the ships and move forward. Make a decisive break with your old patterns of life and embrace wholeheartedly a life with Christ. Amen? Amen. Burn the ships. Burn the ships. There might be some people today who I think need to have some ships burnt. You're looking backwards, you know, you're living a Christian life, but you keep looking back and going, oh, but remember when I used to do this? Remember this lifestyle? Remember that? Burn the ships. There's nothing back there but heartache and pain. There's nothing back there but disappointment. Burn that ship decisively. Do something with it. You know, don't keep hanging on to it and going, oh, some of us have some things that we aren't quite ready to let go of. We become Christians, but we hang on to these things. And they're like a ball and chain. We're holding behind them, we're dragging them along, and they're just dragging us down. Burn the ships, cut it loose and let it go. Don't live any longer hanging on to this stuff. Your future is in the promised land with Christ. It is not in Moab. If you haven't perhaps given your life to Christ this morning, can I encourage you maybe consider making a decision that will change your life forever? Will turn your life around in an about-face into a different direction. If you've got things that you need to deal with this morning, don't sit there in your pew. Come forward and ask for prayer. Let's break some of those ties this morning, shall we? Maybe you're just struggling, you feel a bit dry in your faith, and you don't know, how to move forward, or you just feel like there's some ball and chain that's hanging around you that you need to deal with, or something from your past that's crept up that you need to deal with. Maybe you feel like you're unworthy for some reason because of something you may have done. Maybe even as a Christian, not even for the past, but even right now, that you feel like you need to deal with because it's a blockage stopping you from actually having an intimate relationship with your Father. Today, I encourage you to come forward and actually ask and receive some prayer. Maybe there's some things that you need to confess. I don't talk about confession much in the Pentecostal church, but there's some things that you might need to confess and say, I have been unfaithful, or I have done this. I need to put myself right with God. Burn the ships, cut the ties, face forward, and don't look back. Amen?
If you are new to the church or visiting for the very first time, can I encourage you to fill in one of the welcome cards that you received as you came in this morning? Up and coming services. On Sunday the 5th of November, we'll have our service reflection with Communion, Rev Kids program and Youth Connect. Speaker, Pastor Bruce Langford. In the evening on the 5th of November, we'll have our prayer meeting online only, starting at 7 p.m. Please check our website for Zoom link details. On Sunday the 12th of November, we'll have our service of celebration again with Full Worship Band and Rev Kids program. We'll also have a special guest from City Life Whittlesea. Pastor Ben Warwick is the young adults pastor at City Life and is a dynamic speaker and great communicator. We are looking forward to having him share with us during this service.
empty nesters, that's those of you who no longer have children living at home. You have been invited to lunch at the Royal Mail Hotel. If you would like to attend, please contact Joe MacArthur or Mark Bovey. Thank you.